Is that are the birds chirping with you, Elias?
Yeah.
It might be. I'm outside.
Mashallah.
Do I need to go inside then?
No. I'm just saying you're in Minneapolis. We didn't we hear birds chirping like that. You must be not in Minneapolis, so it's okay.
By the way, guys, we're live. We
All
can
right,
give
guys.
people, if you guys want to share it, I can wait about 20 or 30 seconds until we start this discussion today. But if you want a few seconds, you guys can go ahead and share it. If not, we'll begin.
Okay.
But while you guys are sharing it, I'll just do a
Okay.
quick intro. Everybody, welcome to the WalaWay. This is Imran Nanlawala, and I have a very exciting panel that will be discussing the current situation that is gripping our nation after the death of George Floyd. We have with us today Elias Ali, who is from Minnesota, and he's an outreach coordinator. We have Abdullah Oduro, a entrepreneur, coach, and public speaker, and a late game time decision entry, Dr. Ronnie Doss, old college friend of mine who is from Chicago and a doctor of psychology. How are you guys all doing?
Doing well.
Great.
So obviously we don't have to give a long preamble. We know.
So I went out for about a second. I couldn't hear no audio from anybody.
Can you hear us now, Elias?
Can't hear us?
Can you hear us now, Elias?
I can hear Dr. Doss.
Okay. Can Dr. Ronnie Abdullah, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. So Ronnie,
Okay. Yep.
all right, we might have
Might just be maybe like a little bit of lag or something.
Okay. So guys, initial reactions, we know what transpired a couple of days ago when our fellow human George
So
was
I can't hear Imran if he's talking right now.
How about now, Elias? Can you hear me? You can't hear me?
Elias. Elias.
Elias, can you hear Imran?
I can hear you clearly though.
Oh,
I
okay.
can't hear.
Seems like you can only hear me.
Okay, so what we may have to do.
I don't know. I heard him before.
If you can message him and let him know to leave the room and re-enter it, I think that might be best. And he might have to get off of his headset.
Okay. They said try leaving the room and then getting back in to it. That should work.
Okay.
I think. Okay. So guys, obviously we know what happened and what transpired. A lot of people are reacting in different ways, but what were some of the original or initial reactions that you guys had to the death of George, in terms of, were you guys in shock? Were you in awe? Are you guys numb to all of this because it happens in your estimation very often? What were your initial thoughts? And Dr. Ronnie, I'll start with you.
All right. Yeah, I don't want to necessarily say that you're being numb to it, but the shock value I definitely think wasn't there, at least from my perspective, because this is something that we've seen a lot of historically and recently, especially with the increase in video cameras as well, kind of going on capturing these things that a lot of us who grew up in these situations and known people have known existed, but now even more of the world is seeing it. So I don't want to say numb, but it's not a shocking thing because it still hurts and it's still an impactful thing that this continues to go on. But shock, no, unfortunately.
Abdullah, yourself?
Just you hear about it. It's something that you say, subhanallah. You just say to yourself, again or not again. You say not. You see, how you see something, and it's something you've seen before. You just say again, man. That's exactly what went through my mind the first time I heard about it. But then when I saw it, it was just ridiculous, utterly ridiculous. I mean, there was no other word that came from my mind. No other word that came out of my mouth was just like ridiculous, just ridiculous. So yeah, that was my initial response. Just shaking my head and just saying ridiculous.
Elias, obviously you're an outreach coordinator and you live in Minnesota. So when this happened in your stomping grounds, what were your first thoughts?
So actually, I'm no longer a what do you call it? Outreach coordinator. I'm now a principal at a private Islamic private school. But as far as how I felt, the initial reaction, I would, echo the same sentiments that Dr. Doss and my brother Abdullah Oduro had mentioned. But one of the first things I was feeling was just like a lot of anger. Same thing. Like again, we have to watch this, and I think this one is a little bit different from our brother Ahmed out in Atlanta, Georgia, and how he was gunned down. Whereas this was just, slowly, the life being choked out of this man, George Floyd. And, I, when I initially got the video, I didn't watch it at first. Because like I said, I'm a principal, so I'm, doing e-learning and I was busy throughout my day. And then I think around 4:30 in the afternoon, I took a break. That's when I had just finished with, my school duties. And then when I watched it, I was just clutching the phone and I was waiting for something to happen. I thought, that the man was gonna move. I thought, the other officer who was kind of like standing protecting the other officer, I thought he was gonna turn around, and I thought there was gonna be some kind of reaction, and I just, uh, anger and deep sadness. That was, but like you said, but not shocked though. Definitely not shocked. This is something that's unfortunately all too familiar, for anybody in the community of color. So yeah, I remember just clutching my phone so hard, and then I had to stop. But at the same time, it was almost like the expression, like a car accident, you can't look away from. And I was like, I have to see this to the end and see what happens. Um, and yeah, and then brother, I cried. I cried that it had to have something like this happen. So and it was something that seemed so simple that he could have just, all he had to do was move. He was already restrained, and it was, and all he had to do was just get up. That's all he had to do, man. And yeah, but I think, like I said, I would voice the same sentiments that was already said.
So I mean, there's just so much to unpack and discuss, and I don't like to politicize things, or I don't like to go into controversy. But why do you guys think that this keeps happening? Before we move on to the riots, before we move on to the way people are reacting, in my eyes, one extreme to another. But why do things and incidences like this keep happening? Where, in this instance at least, it seemed like the person was on the ground in handcuffs. He was under control. He wasn't really resisting. He wasn't endangering anybody's life. Why do you think these type of things happen, and why are they tolerated? Anybody can jump in.
Well, I mean, I would say just because they don't see us the same, that we're looked at as different, and by them I mean, law enforcement. They don't see, black people, people of color, brown people to be, the same. They have biases, and whether they're implicit or explicit biases. And so I remember hearing D.L. Hughley, a comedian and writer and an activist. He mentions, whenever something happens in the white community, they get the Army Corps of Engineers type of police. And then when it comes to, communities of color and black people, we get the Marines. And so, that's the type of policing that they think, we deserve. And, because, yeah, like I said, they don't see us as fully human beings. It's almost like it's a carryover from the Constitution, with the 3/5 compromise that they had. So it's almost like that's still in effect, that we're not fully human beings like everybody else. That's my take.
Ronnie, anything you want to add on, or any further comments?
No, I mean, I think that's a real powerful, take and perspective on the matter. And, it could possibly be something that's playing a role. It's really difficult, to say for sure, because there's so many factors, I think, that are at play. And like you said, that's been built up for so long. Like you said, even going back to, 3/5, and these things have been constantly going on with policing. So there's been a storm of things that's just been brewing just constantly for centuries. I think that really plays a role, and it's real difficult. I think it's really you kind of holding each other accountable. So these officers are kind of paramilitary type of unit, and you have the military and their ideas, and no brother left behind, and just sort of fraternity, sorority type of mentality, and very group thing where you get a lot of people together and kind of this homogeneous group of people. When you start to have group think, I think the big part of it is really holding your fellow members accountable. I think is the issue here when you look at those video of what happened to this individual, George Floyd, or the pictures of it, whatever it may be. Have you seen it? The individual with the knee on the neck thing there, and his hands in his pocket, all casual, like it's just another day, and the other officer standing above, like I think maybe checking IDs or something. I'm not exactly sure, and the other individuals as well holding them, and nobody of that group decide, hey, he's handcuffed, get off him. If you're not holding the other ones accountable to do something, then it's a situation where you make yourself just as liable. And it's what it was four officers, one on the neck that we mainly have been focused on. The other three, it didn't cross any of their mind that, oh, this is excessive. Hey, get off his neck. What are you doing? And for that to happen, and no one say anything, that I think speaks volumes of the problem, that nobody was there to do anything, to say anything. And it's kind of like the bystander effect. We talked about when, the individual got stabbed, I think it was in like New York, and a bunch of people were out there and they stabbed in public and nobody reacted because everyone was waiting for the next person to do something. And usually what they tell in those situations is to point someone out directly, hey, you over there in the blue shirt, you go, stop that. You tell him to get off of that. And I don't know if it's they all just waiting for the other one to say anything. Again, paramilitary, military type thing. There's, status on, who's your leader. You all follow a chain of command. I don't know anyone's rank in that, that was out there, who they felt responsible, who needed to be the one to say it. But any one of them had an opportunity to kind of speak up and say something about it. And because nobody did, again, I think that's a bigger problem, that all those individuals was there and no one spoke to the excessive force that cost this individual his life, which is very unfortunate.
Abdullah, I'm gonna give you a chance if you want to add on to it, but I have another question for you. Do you want to add on to what the brothers are talking about, or can I ask you my other question?
No, go ahead. You can ask. Go ahead.
What's interesting is, sometimes these things don't hit home until they hit home, right? Until it hits our community or it hits our city, our village. And I know something that the mayor of Atlanta was talking about. The I forgot her name. She's an African American woman, and she was basically saying that when all this started going down, she called her son and she said, "Where are you? Like, get home, like get inside, close the doors." So something that you and I kind of talk about from time to time is you have to give your sons. You got 3 African American boys, right? And you have to give them pep talks from time to time in terms of their reality. So when you see these things start to happen, and you see how the community starts reacting, and you see, okay, there's extremism on both sides. What goes on through your mind? And when you specifically think about your children, what are some of the first things that come to mind?
Some of the first things that come to mind is awareness. To be aware of where you're living, the reality of where you're living, and your position in that, within the whole scheme of things. A lot of times we'll make statements of what we want things to be, and that may, because we're visionaries, and sometimes that being a visionary can lead to being idealistic. And the problem with that is it's convoluted, because you can have a vision and you may work towards that vision, but you're living as though you're an idealist, to where you don't deal with reality. And the reason I say that is because, subhanAllah, you think about, like myself, like you mentioned, I have 3 sons and 1 daughter, and my oldest son is 16. I just came from picking him up. And when I picked him up, he was waiting outside with 3 other, African-American gentlemen, 3 other black boys. and they were around his age, and you know they had their little dreads, twists, or what have you, and there were two cop cars right there. They were standing in between them, but it was as soon as I saw it, my brain just snapped. Like, what's going on?
Hmm.
Right, automatically, and you know, I'm automatically apprehensive. I'm automatically thinking about, okay, what am I going to do when I get up there? Right? That's the reality that I'm talking about, is that this is a young, you know, my son being a young African American male. And, you know, the thing that's interesting is, like, you know, you know, it's crazy that you see this one. He wasn't even a young African American male, right? He's an African American man. But just the reality of, yes, there is you can call it bias if you want, you call it racism if you want, you call it stereotype, which can lead to discrimination, discriminatory practices, which dictate, you know, that discrimination stereotype can dictate how you treat someone because of the way that they look or their orientation. That's just the reality that we have to accept. And with that acceptance, you'll know how to properly move. So when you talk about that lecture with the, you know, Mayor Katrina, the mayor of Atlanta, you know, I sat down my son and his friends. I sat them down. And we watched it, and then I wanted to hear their perception on it. You know, what and why that even matters to them. You know, and then after that, I played Rodney King. They had no idea who Rodney King was. So then I played the video of Rodney King. I said, "Look, this is the first, if not the first, video of police officers caught, you know, in the middle of an act of brutality. And then they were acquitted. So what does that mean to you, young 15-year-old black man? What does that mean to you right now? Like, are you not, this doesn't apply to you? You know, I'm not sitting there trying to tell them anything. I just want them to absorb it and to see that this is the world you're living in. How are you going to work with it? How are you going to deal with it? So that was really, you know, that's really what, when I see a young African American male, you could say that I'm not going to say I worry, but I'm very, very concerned of their outlook on life, right? And how they plan to move within that whole current vision of how they view the world.
So now let's kind of move on to the initial shock. Okay, people are upset, people are outraged, as they should be. Someone's, you know, innocently murdered. But now as time goes by, we see how people's anger and frustration start boiling over, and, you know, we have destruction of property, buildings and things being vandalized. I mean, this is just a quick way to kind of introduce this topic, but what do you guys think about the way certain people have been responding to the situation? Do you think that this is justified? Do you think that this is excessive? Do you think that there's any benefit in destroying property and businesses in your own communities or even in other people's communities? So what are your initial reactions to those things happening? Elias, we can start with you since you're in Minnesota.
Yeah. I mean, firstly, as you know, a person of faith, as a Muslim, this is something that, you know, our faith teaches us, that the destruction of property, and even before that, the destruction of life and taking of life is not something that's acceptable. It's one of the major goals of, you know, the religion of Islam. One of its major goals is the preservation of life and also the preservation of wealth and property. It's called the Maqasid al-Sharia. And so when you see these things happen, and that's the first thing I got to say, is I don't condone those, and that they're okay. But with that being said, it is understandable. If anybody has an inkling of humanity and empathy to what's happening, as we mentioned, it's on the outset when we said that there was no shock, right, for a lot of Black people, and, you know, people, because we're so used to seeing this and nothing happening. We're used to seeing this and then nothing happening, seeing this and then police officers getting acquitted. Seeing these, Black lives being taken, or people of color, male and female, and then and no consequences. And so it's understandable now, especially like the way that this whole situation happened. People were still uh, trying to process what happened to Ahmed down in Atlanta, and again, it wasn't until the video went viral that the police officers were even pulled in. And then with so many others that have charged. So it's understandable the frustration that people are feeling, that if we don't take things into our own hands and do this, that then nothing is going to happen as far as justice is concerned. And so, although I don't condone it and I don't think that it's okay, both, like I said, as far as my faith is as a Muslim, and as civically, but it's understandable. I mean, I'm so frustrated and tired of having to think of that conversation, like Abdullah Oduro was saying, that he has to have with his sons to explain to them, because on the one hand, I'm sure like any other man, would want to teach their sons that, to be dignified, that they, should, fear nobody, that they should, hold their heads up high, that they should be, productive, and so on and so forth. Yet at the same time, we have this structure that seems to say, with its apathy, otherwise. And so, again, I repeat, I don't condone it, but I understand it. I have a brother who's 23. I have a sister who's 22. I have another brother who's 20, and I got another brother who's 17. And so when I talk to them, and I'm, they're older, and so there's a big gap between. I'm 38 years old. So when I talk to my brothers and my sister, I can visibly see and hear in their voice the anger and the frustration, and the look of like, we're not trying to be patient no more. This whole peaceful compromise and discussion, and coming to the table, and uh, because that same tactic has been used for so long, and yet it just would seem there's a corollary relationship between civic disobedience and civil unrest and things happening for people of color throughout the history in America. That now, I'm not saying that is all right, but that seems to be the way that things are happening. That just seems to be the history of America. And so I just say that I understand it. And to be honest, it's partly why I even accepted to come in and speak on this venue, is because I felt like I had a student of mine who I used to teach at the masjid before I left to be a principal, and he called me, and he was going to the protest initially, because the masjid that I used to work at is in South Minneapolis, so it's close to Lake Street. Matter of fact, it's like I'd say about 7 blocks away or so. So just before all of the looting started happening, he called me, and then it's starting to go on, and he asked me, like, is it okay for me to be down there? Should I be here? I'm here peacefully protesting, but all this stuff is going on. People are breaking into ATM machines and whatnot. And I told him, to be careful. I understand, but I felt conflicted. If I tell him stay home, it looks like, and I felt like it would be like I'm telling him don't do anything, don't say nothing, even though it's for his safety, and the concern that, since the same perspective that got George Floyd killed and Ahmed in Atlanta, Georgia, they're not going to discriminate. That man was just jogging down the street. I mean, and George Floyd, he can't breathe. And so they don't discriminate between somebody who's doing simple daily activities versus somebody who's a criminal. So I want to tell him stay at home and be safe. But instead, I was trying to tell him, look, if it's an organized protest, if there's clear leadership, if it's transparent, then man, I would say go ahead. It's good to be there. But if there's looting and there's things going on, then you need to check out. And so I asked him at that point, hey, are there other people, friends of yours? And by the way, this young man, he's about 20 years old. I said, do you think they have the same question that you're asking? He was like, yeah, of course, man. He was like, you should say something. And then he quoted something that I had taught him, and it came like full circle. I was like, man, this is the, the student becoming the teacher. There's a statement that we teach about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where he says, "Man ra'a minkum munkaran falyughayyiruhu biyadihi." That if the Prophet, peace be upon him, he said that if you see something, anyone from amongst you, and he didn't identify a certain status or whatever. He said anybody from amongst you, if you were to see something wrong, then you should change it with your hands. And then if you're not able to do so, and then you should change it with your tongue. And if you're not able to do so, then you should hate it in your heart. And that level right there is the weakest of faith. So when he told me that, then later on I spoke to Abdullah, and he said, hey, the same thing. You should say something. You're in Minneapolis. You're not. How could you not? And so I told him, look, you just tell me, man, and I'll try. I feel like I have to say something too, in spite of the fact that there might already be other people who've spoken more eloquently and better on the issue than I have. But this is not the time for anybody, black, white, it doesn't matter. This is not the time for anybody to be silent right now. Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, thank you. I really appreciate that balanced approach in terms of activism, but safe activism, right? So speak up, show your presence. But again, I appreciate the way you brought in, and again, some of us, we share a faith. So it's good that, part of our religion is the preservation of life. That is such a big goal of Islam is. And that's why sometimes when I observe these things from a distance, things are very black or white for me. Cause I say, nope, can't destroy property. Nope. You can't harm somebody. You can't slander somebody. These things are very clear, right? Abdullah, I'm going to let you jump in at any second. You can jump in. But Ronnie, I have to ask you a question based on what Elias said and the question that I posed. As someone who got a doctorate in psychology, you're from the south side of Chicago. You understand the human mind. You deal with people all the time. Talk to me what you feel is going on in the minds of both sides. One, the side of the people who have been victimized to an extent, and the other side, which is some of the authorities sometimes who, like, my sister is a police officer, right? And one thing that my sister, she mentioned to me very clearly, she goes, look, she said, there's a lot of good cops out there, right? We got to get over this notion that all police officers are bad or all police officers are corrupt. She said, there's police officers who are out there, they're scared. She shared some instances here in Chicago where police officers were, they're told what to do. They go to a neighborhood or they go to an area, but sometimes they're even being attacked. So what do you think is going on in the minds and psychology of these different people?
I think there's a lot of possibilities what's going on, and not being anyone's individual, doctor. I can't speak to anything precisely, but I think there's several possibilities and working theories. Elias, I think, just kind of going back to some of the things he said, I think were like just really brilliant about some of the things that he talked about, the different angles of this, what's going on, to try to protect, preserve life and the property, and having, the student come to him and then kind of be torn between that idea of like, it's dangerous out there, but also not wanting you to stay home. And this is not a time for people to necessarily sit on the sidelines, which is, why I tried to make myself available today for you as well, to do this, to make sure that I get a chance to speak to you about these things, because I think it's a very important matter. So just kind of definitely touching on that again, I just think that was, really important and needed to be heard. But I mean, you have, groups of people, and the way I look at this, again, I don't know. I'm a big, data person, research, but obviously we're not able to survey all the people that's out here when we're talking about, who's protesting, who's looting, to find out what exactly the numbers is. The way I'm viewing this, and I'm gonna choose to view this right now in this way without any necessarily knowledge of if this is actually how it is. I think we have several different groups of people working right now with what we're seeing playing out on our TV screens and in our media. I'm going to work under the assumption that there's a group of people that is protesting the injustices done to this George Floyd, and the loss of his life and everything that represents, and what other people have seen in their life, and what it relates to in the history. I think there's a group. I'm going to have that group of people that they're out there and they're protesting they're truly protesting, I think, in a safe manner. I think there's then another group who now see that there's an opportunity to hit the streets, go out and, loot, caused some chaos. A lot of frustration built up that they want to lash out, at authorities and at public property institutions and now private property as well. And they see this as an opportunity to do so. And I believe that that's a different group that's out there, different from the ones that are actually trying to, protest and get some justice for this individual and many people that suffer like them. I think there's also another possibility of a group. We have seen it before where there's been entities and individuals that infiltrate certain movements and act out in this way and to undermine it. Because, even our topics now, and look at the mainstream of what we got covering on, this all started with these deaths that's been captured on cameras. There's injustice that's going on. Now it's taken to looting, storage, closing, destruction, stealing property. Now that's the story. It's now hijacked what has happened. That was the same thing that we saw in the Colin Kaepernick thing when he wanted to take a knee for this police injustices and send that message. It became a narrative switch of, oh, well, you're disrespecting the military. This is what this is about. This is about the flag. This is about the military. You're not, appreciative of that or those services. And, the whole cause of his issue was completely lost. Kneel and not kneel. And I feel like that's kind of what's going on in ways when we decide to, promote these things that's going on. And you got to think we have a pandemic going on right now that's been going on. People's been inside. A lot of people out of work where we have 30, 40 something million people filing for unemployment right now. The conditions are ripe for like this anger and outrage to kind of get out. People's been inside. They want to, lash out. People have been struggling. They have an opportunity to get out. I think that's something that's going on. And a lot of people who's been experiencing trauma and abuse in their personal life, their family life, the ones closest to them, there's generational trauma and effect and things that's been going on and anger that's been built up, life after life that's been going on in these families and generations, and having to, see it again play out, it hits the heart. And like, you're saying at the beginning, like that anger can be that initial reaction and you want to get out there and express that, know people that, I'm not happy. And you're saying like, the idea of peaceful talks and things working at first, no longer working. So is this what you respond to? Is this what people feel that they may need to do in order to get the response that they need or finally get paid the attention that they need? Because when you try to go about it another way, that perhaps it's not working. So I think, all those kind of powder keg type situations and it's, building up. And like you were saying, your sister, being a police officer, family members as well, and, law enforcement and friends as well. And yeah, I mean, it's obviously, a situation where there's not just, one side, it's not just extreme. Everybody's not going to be, perfect. Everybody's not going to, be the worst. But I think kind of, the comedic, sense, not, necessarily funny, but I think it was maybe Chris Rock. I'm not sure if it was him or Chappelle in one of their latest specials talked about, when the police brutality and, it's like, yeah, not all cops are bad, but, there are some jobs where the public is entrusted that we can't afford any bad apples because it's a life or death situation, Yeah. And, he talked about the same thing with pilots, right? And he said, we can't have, you can't be like, oh, there's a lot of good pilots, most of them, but, we got a couple bad apples that, like to kind of like, run into the side of a cliff, right? Like we can't, you entrusted with this position, you have to be better. And it is very, very stressful work that they do, but we have to hold you accountable because you've been entrusted with protection of those, the protection of that life, the protection of those property, protection of us. So we have to have you be better. We have to have you strive for perfection and for all those other people in that circle to hold each other accountable so that we can get there and they can try to get there together and we find solutions. So that's what I think is kind of, I wanted to say about that situation.
Yeah. If I could say something too, Imran, two things. One, I think everybody would understand that sentiment about there being bad apples. It's the issue of the lack of accountability when it comes to law enforcement, in particular when it comes to people of color. In Minneapolis, there was not too long ago, an affluent white lady who was shot by a male black Somali officer, Muhammad Noor, and she, her family seemingly got justice like expeditiously, and not only that, on top of that, the family got like $20 million. He was charged with murder, and now he's in prison for like the next 12 years. But that's out of multiple shootings and killings that have happened in Minnesota. The first person who was apprehended, charged, and convicted was a black man killing a white woman. But all the other people like Philando Castile and others who've been, killed here in Minnesota, that was the first one where that was the first time it seemed that a police officer had been, charged and sentenced, and the family, getting, as they see it, justice. So everybody understands there's bad apples in, for every profession, but it's the issue of accountability. So I just wanted to, reemphasize that, and then, yeah, I'll stop there though, because
No, that's great. That's great. And Ronnie, I wanted to add to what you said because, again, having the spiritual connection that me, Elias, and Abdullah have, that there is this principle that when you try to strive for a certain position in your life, you're going to be accountable, right? So whether you're a teacher, a business person, a doctor, you're going to be held to a certain standard because you're supposed to do your job with excellence. This is a principle from our religion that when you do something, you do it with excellence. So I really love the example that you gave about the pilot and the police officer. And this is one thing I wish they would do a better job at, which is explaining to these young people who join the force that, look, you're not an everyday citizen, right? You're someone who's charged with enforcing the law. So you're going to be held to a higher standard and a higher regard. And this is why, like, because of that, this is why we honor our military people. This is why we honor our law enforcement people, right? Because we all understand that they're doing something which is not easy. It's a sacrifice. They work long hours. They're out there in dangerous neighborhoods. They're away from their families. Abdullah, I'm going to let you just jump in, man, and kind of address what the brothers have been saying and add on whatever you think is important.
No, I mean, there's a lot here, man. There's a lot. Actually, I'm actually glad that both of them came on. Obviously, because Elias is right there. I mean, he lives in Minneapolis, and he's seeing it. He can go down the street and see and hear, obviously, from people that are probably there, etc. But then Dr. Ronnie, being he's his background in psychology, that's his profession. I actually wanted to see what y'all's thoughts are on the issue of built up, I don't want to say rage, but I want to say built up energy, okay, and how to release and exert that energy. And I'm using the word energy to be very neutral, and I'll tell you why. Let me explain. My children, like, I like to let them, I like to have them read and watch videos of well-known figures in whatever field that they like. You find a lot of times that these professionals or these, well-known figures, sports figures, historical figures, they had some element or something that happened in their life that was, a sorrowful thing, but it led them to do something that would serve as a means of exerting that energy. So, for instance, you have basketball. A lot of basketball players, when you look at their history, like, for instance, like, I mean, he mentioned like LeBron James. His father wasn't there. With his mom and things of that nature. That anger is let out on the basketball court. Russell Westbrook with his friend dying. That anger is let out on the basketball court. So you see that exertion of anger is because of something that happened. And it's indirect trauma. So they're releasing that anger and that frustration through that means of basketball, through that means of artistry, through that means of music. And that's what when I gave a sermon, on my Facebook page, I was talking about how, because, like, I think Elias was talking about it, is like, I always tell people, in every community, and I'm particularly speaking about the Muslim community, You know, sometimes we'll fall victim of saying, well, why would he go to this Target and do that? That's so stupid, right? But you always have to remember, they didn't just wake up wanting to go to a Target and just vandalize, you know, the Target in their community, probably where their mother and their auntie was a cashier working. They didn't just wake up wanting to do that. There's something behind that. What is that? That's the question that needs to be asked before we just go and ridicule someone. At the same token, yes, you definitely, you know, as we mentioned, everyone, as we always say, you know, someone's right is someone else's responsibility. You know, my children have rights and their rights are my responsibility. You know, your neighbor has rights upon you. Therefore, it leaves for you a responsibility. So when we're seeing this, that's why I said, you know, and Ronnie was mentioning also, Dr. Ronnie was mentioning that, you know, basically, you know, I understand their pain. I understand where they're coming from because there was something that led to it. They didn't just want to just, and mind you, and as he made the very good categorization, that there are some people that just want to go out there and loot. They say, man, it's going down over there, and they're looting the Target, man. Let me just go and run in and come right back out. You know, me personally, if it wouldn't have been for me trying to find God and trying to have some purpose in my life, I probably would have been a little one of those guys just getting the ski mask on, going in and come right back out. And then going right back down the street and going in the garage. Hey, what'd you get, man? What'd you get? What'd you get? Oh, man, you know, we don't even no, because when it comes to, you know, if an elder general was to come and say, hey, man, what are y'all doing to organize? What, they on top, they're just going to mess it up anyway. They don't care about us, right? They don't care about us. So that's what I'm talking about. And that's what I mentioned in, you know, when I was talking about in the sermon earlier, you know, I'm almost sure each one of us have had a situation where we've had our own encounter with law enforcement. And it was, you know, it was those pilots that'll run you into a cliff, right? You know, and they'll say things. I remember one, he was basically like, you know, take that pick away. It's scaring me. Like he was letting me know that, look, you know, we're not here for your best interest right now. If we find something, we are going to capitalize on that. And as a matter of fact, we may plant something, right? Because they tried to plant some marijuana on us. I mean, it was really, that was one of my encounters that it was like, whoa, okay, this is real, you know? So that's one thing I really want to capitalize on, you know, with a lot of the youth. And I was telling, you know, my son and stuff like that is that, you know, I understand that there's frustration. You know, sometimes it's, you know, kids that grew up without a father, kids that grew up with a father, but he was in the house, but he was a man, but he wasn't a dad. He's just there, and he was probably counterproductive, verbally abusive, so on and so forth. Mothers, well, but you know, there's always some place for them to release that anger, and that anger was released for a lot of these people going into Target, so on and so forth. It's about looking at the sources of that anger and seeing, okay, this is what we need to be talking about, rather than we're talking about the effect, but we're not talking about the cause, right? And that's what we need to be talking about. And it's not, you know, it's a catch-22, man, because, you know, subhanAllah, you see, you know, the fact that we have to talk about this now. And that's what I find, you know, to be honest, some individuals that are like, okay, they ask the legitimate question of, or they ask the question of, okay, you know, why was he arrested? Why did he get apprehended? Right? What was he? Was he doing something? Was he resisting arrest? Whether it's you know, Mr. Floyd or other than that, is like, was he resisting arrest to where that happened? We say, okay, fine. He may have been resisting arrest. There may have been intoxication. There may have been all that. That it doesn't warrant his life. Right? It doesn't. The reason that this is an issue is because his life was taken. If he was arrested, it would have just been in the local news. Elias probably would have saw it at 10 p.m. That's it. Right? But it's subhanAllah, it's really what has led to all of this, and that's what we need to be dealing with on a consistent basis, you know, locally and on a national level. You know, subhanAllah, you know, one guy was asking me, you know, one brother and a friend of mine, he was asking, what do you think we should do? I'm like, man, individuals, you know, the YMCAs, you know, these community centers, always having people that are there to uplift and educate people, especially young African American men, and being there to serve as mentors. You know, I remember one time, and I'll leave it at this for y'all to expound upon, you know, the psychological ramifications or elements that lead to this. I remember I was a director of a youth group, and I went to this organization called Big Brother Big Sister. I don't know if y'all heard of it. It was in Houston, and there was a lady there, so I came in there. I just, I said, I want to know your system. How do you all organize for the youth, the young men and the young women? What's the program? She said, well, we don't have the young men get with the, it's the men with the boys and the women with the girls, right? And we have to go through an interview process, and we don't leave them alone until, like, the mother's comfortable, 2 months. They had a whole process, right? So I said, okay. So she was trying to keep me in there, and she said, you think you want to fill out an application? I said, let me ask you a question. Why are you so adamant for me in particular to? She said, you don't understand. There's a high demand for African American males to help with the young men here. There's a high demand because there's a huge influx, and there's no one there that the mothers are satisfied and are happy with. And that really, really, really hit me, man. It really, really hit me because there's a void. And as we all know, there's a huge void, and that void leads to frustration for that 15-year-old, 16-year-old, 17. They say, I never had a dad. I never had someone to talk to me. I never had an OG, and, especially like, you and, Dr. Ronnie, and Imran, y'all from Chicago, man. Chicago, what they call it, like, Chirac now, and what's going on right now in Chicago is police are getting abused now. If that gets out of hand, that's like Minneapolis 3.0, Sheikh. I mean, that's going to go to a whole other level. And it's a lot of frustrated people. So that's what I really wanted to really capitalize on, because, it's funny. I remember when it's the last quote, and I'll leave it for y'all. It's I remember it's a friend of mine. He's a old school Latin American gentleman, and he was in the university for a number of years. University, he was locked up, and I remember, I'll never forget, I saw Snoop Dogg. He was at, I think, the Million Man March, right, with the Nation of Islam.
Mm.
And I was like, man, what does Snoop Dogg think what is he doing, right? Who does he think he is? From going to gin and juice to trying to come up here and tell me something, right? Man, this old school brother, you know what he said? He looked, and he said it so subtly. He said, I said, what does he think is he doing? He said, the best that he can. And I was like, whoa. Right? Who am I to like, if he's in his process of trying, and that's his means of redemption, that's the way that he does it, I can't criticize that much. You know what I'm saying? So it's very, very interesting. You can't just look at what people do. You got to say, okay, what are the, psychologically, I really like to capitalize on ramifications that led to that, or elements that led to that.
Yeah. If I could say something, Imran, as well. Um, somebody I should have said earlier, Jazakallah khair, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. I should have said that earlier, and Abdullah Oduro, and sharing a panel with Dr. Ronnie Doss. One thing that was mentioned earlier about who's doing this, and there being different categories of people who are out there on the streets, those who are peacefully protesting, which I wanted to highlight is actually I think a number of the people, if not most of them, who are out there peacefully protesting. Even Tim Walz, the mayor of Minneapolis, and the mayor, Tim Walz is the governor of Minnesota, the mayor of Minneapolis and the mayor of St. Paul actually mentioned that the people who are looting and pillaging and destroying property and bringing all this carnage to Minneapolis, and as well as St. Paul, by the way. There's actually 170 buildings that were burned the same night, when there were only 10 in Minneapolis, actually. But they mentioned that they have information that a lot of those people are not even from Minnesota, and a lot of them are. And I'm just paraphrasing from what Tim Walz, because he had a press conference yesterday about the curfew that they implemented here in the metro area. that white supremacists, uh, anarchists, and then other people who are simply just taking advantage of the chaos and of this unfortunate event. And so I just wanted to highlight that too, that most of the people that are out there, even last night when they had the curfew into effect and the National Guard came out and the police in force, they had on CNN, they had reporters showing that everybody was protesting peacefully, and in spite of that, only reinforcing how everybody feels about the police right now. In spite of them being peacefully protesting, tear gas, you know what I'm saying? Rubber bullets, and military, well, not even, military tactics on, civilians who are, exercising their constitutional right to peacefully protest. And, I can't help but think, all of the different times that we've seen, across the country where, people come to ardently, almost religiously protest their Second Amendment right to carry militarized, military weapons, not, handguns or rifles, but, what do you call it, AR, assault rifles and whatnot. And they come out in force, not a hair is touched on those people's heads, you know, and they come, they intimidate, and they put fear in people, and and law enforcement always seem to come to a peaceful resolution to those uh, protests, and you can even see them get down with them. But yeah, I just wanted to highlight that fact that a lot of the people out there, including today, were peacefully protesting. And in spite of that, they were still treated like everybody else. And according to the governor, and I will say, Dr. Ronnie, when you mentioned that there's no data, Tim Walz was actually asked about that and refused to give data. He refused to give data to one of the NPR reporters that asked specifically where are they getting that, the information about who's loot, the people who are being arrested, how to, them being identified as far as are they, residents of Minnesota, residents of Minneapolis and St. Paul and the metro area. But they did mention that there are people, many of them, if not most of them, who are looting and burning and whatnot. That many of them who are inciting that they're not even from Minnesota. Yeah, and so I just wanted to highlight that. And then when you have that, that serves as the tinderbox for all those other people that Abdullah Oduro was just talking about that are frustrated. That kind of just pushes them over the edge to go ahead and vent that frustration. When they see a building burning, they're like, well, it's already started, so we have more right than anybody else to be frustrated, so we're gonna go ahead and let it out. Yeah.
Go ahead, Ronnie. I
Yeah.
think Abdullah and Elias both pointed some questions at you, so respond to kind of what they were touching upon.
No, I mean, I think those are all very good questions and very good things to kind of point out that I think we make sure, is important. Like Abdullah was saying about too, the anger and making sure like, well, what do we do with it? What is it coming from? How do we help direct it? Because it is something that I think is very prevalent in these individuals that, we're seeing out there. And, many of us just feeling that, we've been getting, the short end of the stick for so long that so much of this is built up. How do we do it in a constructive way? Like you mentioned, some of the athletes and their stories and being able to turn things into a positive. It's always one of those things. I went to the Adler School or whatever, and Alfred Adler, the psychologist, that was one of his biggest kind of things and theories. Is like this inferiority complex, right? And how do we decide to overcome it? So there's something that we feel inferior at, and then there's different ways that we try to compensate for this, and it can lead us down various paths. Like in his life, personally, he was a very sick child dealing with issues medically, and then he also became a medical doctor. That was his solution. He had his inferiority health wise, so his way of trying to overcome it was him becoming this doctor to address it. I think growing up, people like in poverty and at the bottom of economic things and not having ownership and property and feel like all these many injustices, there's a certain inferiority that is either implicitly or explicitly stated to you that that you're being less than. Elias even talked about it early in the podcast, and like it's almost like the 3/5 thing. We're not even a full individual in some instances, and this generational kind of idea and perspectives has been, you know, constantly like out there, and people feel that they feel these same frustrations that, all right, we these many years removed from these things, why is our position? Why hasn't it changed? What is going on? And so people, they want to be heard. They want someone, I believe, to answer these questions that they've had their whole life. Why am I in this situation? And they haven't been getting any answers, right? Like what is the solutions to what's going on right now? I always like kind of come back to, if like if we get to identifying some of the problems and we seeing some of it, what's the solutions that people are willing to give us? What are kind of solutions that they're talking about? And that's I think that's one of the things that I think is very important, that we look at what are we gonna do in this situation. How do we continue to stop these things that we say we keep happening? Where is it come from? I think that a lot of this, the economic strife and the struggle that is going on, really have these situations boiling over. And now with this whole COVID crisis, we're seeing even more people in economic distress and frustration, leading to depression and anxiety, about like, what is life? What is our livelihood, going to come? Where's our answers? And we have been seeing, populations, of color, a lot of in the Black community, dying at a more alarming rate with the disease. This is another factor, is, what's going on now. There's something else that we're dying from even more. We're now getting the short end of the stick of a pandemic across the world as well. Why is this situation kind of existing? And I think that's kind of, the answers we have to, really get to and look at, like, where's this come from? This is something that has gone on for so long. I think, especially as far as the Black community being left out of the participation in the building of this country and the wealth for all this time, from the slavery, days, and being kept out to, Reconstruction and, Jim Crow. And we haven't, had a lot of participation in these things. We've been limited in so many ways that we're not getting a chance to, overcome and, assimilate into the economy, of America that's supposed to be the greatest, economy and capitalist system there. We've been, placed on the sideline so many times with these things. And I really just think people are getting to the point where they fed up. Like, these conditions, don't change. You look back at the times that we had, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act in 64 and 65. And, I think there was a large misconception that by eliminating discriminatory laws, that you were going to eliminate the discrimination and the things that those laws that existed for so long time, the consequences of those would also be eliminated. But it's not. Like, you can eliminate these things and get rid of it, but it doesn't remove all the damage that it's done. It's like you're taking someone, that's been wounded, right? And it's like, okay, we're going to take you out of, that, we're going to carry you here. And then, all right, I know you've been beat up and you've been, badly hurt and all these other things, but, these other group of people, we were starting a race. If they're at the the starting line for the race, and we got to carry you there because you've been beat up so long, and then say, all right, here's the race to prosperity. Go. You're all going to start from the same point. We're not going to finish in the same spot. We're still going to be behind, just because you remove our our bondage and the things kind of holding us back. You don't take away what you did to us. That is always that is also limited us. And I think that's the issue, that people don't understand. That I think people look at like, oh, well, these rights been, these laws been in place since this time, and we haven't had slavery since this. And but why are y'all still, in this position then? Like, all this stuff has been, over. And it, like, no, it's not. There's, Black people have been, kept out of a lot of the things in the finance and wealth. You look at a lot of the wealth in this country and ways to kind of get into that middle class and get that. A lot of it was like owning your own property and doing those, your own businesses and banking. And we were kind of left out a lot of those, even when groups, other minority groups were discriminated against as well in this country, before World War II sort of thing. And then they came with the GI Bill and the FHA for home loans that allowed a lot of people to move up into, the middle class. And then, Black veterans as well, they didn't have that same thing. Education is very segregated. It wasn't enough Black schools to help them like reach that education. So then we don't get to participate in that. So when things look on the surface, I think, a majority of people thought that would just change things, but it hasn't. And that's when people want answers or something that's done to kind of help them out. And I think those are a lot of the causes that we're seeing. And I think that, people, that whole idea of just pull up by your bootstraps, is just a misconceived notion. It's very misleading because there are people working very hard, but they're starting from, starting from way in the back and trying to come forward. It's not a fair situation. And I think that's kind of what we have to look at. And, and that's when you're going to need the policies from, the people and assistance to help us all kind of out this situation to kind of remedy it, because it was, intentionally segregated in government laws and things that kind of put us in this position of being behind, that it's going to take that similar act in order to bring us back up to this position. But now we allowed, this whole idea of it to be perceived as, welfare or just unjustly bringing up this one group and not the others. But, that's what happened before. Those other groups were brought up, through these policies, and we were not. And now when we ask for it, it's just seen as a negative welfare. You're not doing anything. It's seen as a moral failure versus a systemic failure when we talk about, Black people or people of color in general as well, not just Black people, but, mainly Black people in this country in their position.
Go ahead if anybody wants to jump in. It's a hard thing to follow up, Ronnie. I mean, hit it. Explain the situation.
Sorry, I kind of ranted a little bit, but
no, it's something that I've actually wanted to discuss for quite some time, because I have no affiliation with any side. I talk to people from all over. That's what I do. I talk to people, and I'll talk to people on both sides of the aisle. And sometimes some of my friends say everybody has the same opportunity. Everyone has the ability to make themselves into whatever they desire to make themselves into. And I think you just explained very perfectly why that's not always accurate, given the fact that, yes, the laws are one element of it, but then the other element of it is, give me 1 second, guys. I see Elias is trying to join again. I'm not sure what happened. So it's really interesting, because I always give people this example. My family's from the subcontinent, right? And my great-grandparents, who I knew, my grandparents, who I know, they grew up under British rule, or right at the very tail end of British rule. And one thing I used to remember, and it hits you now, but you don't really think of it as a kid, but even when my grandmother moved here, she was really strict about some stuff, man. She was really strict about how we would kind of go outside the house and what time we would stay out until, or what neighborhood we were in, or who would be hanging out with. And sometimes she would follow me outside all the time, and I would catch her following me to the park and to these places. And she always had this like anxiety that something was going to happen. So now that I think about it, and I realize that she grew up at the very tail end of British rule, and she was a kid at that time when the partition between India and Pakistan happened, and there was violence and there was this. So obviously she's always going to have that fear that something is going to happen, to her kids, her grandkids and whatnot. And, it makes sense when you're older. And then also you kind of have to remove yourself from your situation and realize, how does that impact somebody's psychology, somebody's decision-making, somebody's ability to invest in businesses? Because, if I have $100,000, I can't take the risk of investing. I just got to hold on to this wealth, because if I invest and something goes wrong, I've lost all my family's wealth. So I really appreciate that, how you sum that up. And I guess what I'd like to ask all you guys is, you've all alluded to now some solutions, and I want to reiterate, my belief is that two wrongs don't equal a right, right? So we cannot correct a wrong with a wrong. And as Elias very eloquently mentioned, These are just sometimes human responses, and people get frustrated and things boil over. But at the same time, now since we are talking about solutions and building bridges and building ways to move forward, Abdullah mentioned some excellent examples of mentorship, training. There's professional development. There's going into the inner cities, going into black neighborhoods or neighborhoods of people of color or neighborhoods of even poor whites, people who are marginalized, right? And walking them through these steps of, here's how you start a business. Okay, you can't afford to go to the best college. Here's these online programs that are completely free. Here's how you can get such and such a loan or such and such assistance for starting your plans, etc. What do you guys think are some solutions to correct these things that we're seeing? Because, and Abdullah, we'll go to you. Even now in Chicago today, this stuff is getting kind of out of hand, man. It's getting out of hand. This stuff is spreading very quickly to the surrounding cities outside of Chicago. I'm getting alerts on my phone all the time. Such and such mall has been closed down. Home Depot has been closed down. And like somebody mentioned earlier, I think it was Abdullah, you know, a lot of the times, the people who work at these places are people who are working minimum wage. They need the help. They're taking the money back to their families, their communities. So Abdullah, I start with you. How do we start changing these things, and what are some ways that we can practically help those who are in need?
I think it's looking at, you know, firstly, distinguishing who you respect and follow. Like, for instance, when the mayor, you know, Mayor Katrina, the mayor of Atlanta, when she was speaking, she was really just capitalizing on the fact of you're destroying your own community. It's not like you're going out, and I'm not advocating this. It's not like you're going out into the far off suburbs, you know, where most of them probably live anyway, and you're destroying their property. No, you're destroying your own community. Right now, we just come over the COVID-19 and probably just went back to work maybe a month ago. And now the process is just going to repeat because they're going right back home because they really can't work. There's no, I mean, the actual real estate, the physical location is demolished. So, you know, when looking at that, you really have to, when she was speaking, she was talking about how T.I., you know, rapper T.I. and Killer Mike, how they own, she was like they own half of the west side, I guess the west side of Atlanta. And probably some of those properties were demolished. You know, and Killer Mike, he's someone that always talks about, you know, the autonomy of the African American community, to be autonomous, to where the dollar bill rotates more than once. You know, it rotates maybe through 3 or 4 hands instead of just going straight to, you know, the shop, to where it's another community. I don't want to say race, but they'll say race, but another community. It's going back to their community. It's not staying within the African American community, in which, you know, when they provide for each other, it'll help not even raise the economy, but it will uplift them, because they'll see, okay, someone like me is making something of themselves. I mean, that's kind of what, you know, to a certain degree, what Barack Obama was. To a certain degree, it brought hope to a lot of people, and that hope can motivate them to do something or to leave something off. So in conclusion, I mean, there's many elements. I mean, from the groundwork, grassroots work, you know, like I say, you know, there's nothing, we don't even realize it, but when you walk into a community center, man, and you want to go offer your services at a YMCA, you know, 3 days a week, teaching them how to use Microsoft, teaching them how to, you know, basic, you know, anatomy and physiology, to where when they go to, you know, God willing, when they graduate, they have some background before they go into college preparatory courses, basic computer skills, how to read an email, how to write an email, how to, you know, these little soft skills go a long way. But but that's, you know, from grassroots. But then, you know, you'll find people that say, well, even if I get this, who's going to hire me? Right. That's why having that network of people that are within the community that serve as mentors, that can tell them, look, it's still possible for you. I'll teach you. I'll show you the ropes. I'll get you in the door. You know, and because I know you since you were 5 years old. Now you're 25. Right. So I think that's going to be something. And this is not the only thing that I'm saying, but, you know, I think it's really that's really important. And I think, you know, to a certain degree, the Killer Mikes and, you know, what they're doing in the community, you know, what they're promoting is, you know, what do you call it? Autonomy to a certain degree, because people that care about you want to see you win. You know, they want to see you win. They want to see you win, and they're using their time, their money, or their expertise in that. So everybody, you know, whatever they can do within their power to give back to their immediate communities, especially the communities of those that are the people that were, that are angry, that are frustrated, and rightfully so.
Hmm.
Elias, if you can make some suggestions for solutions.
Yeah. Again, want to thank both of y'all for the suggestion that you have. Um, there's so many different things that need to be done. Obviously, this is a layered situation, and I don't think somebody myself as a substantial input to cover all of the different things that need to be done to handle this whole thing, because I mean the death of George Floyd is one thing, but speaking like y'all mentioned earlier about getting to the core of these issues and why they're happening as opposed to just the symptoms. But two things or a few things come to my mind though. um, One is like I guess a general framework based on that prophetic statement that I mentioned earlier by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where he says, whichever amongst you see something wrong, then you should change it with your hand. If you're not able to do so, then to change it with your tongue, and if you're not able to do so, then to hate it in your heart. So starting with changing it, whoever you are, changing it with your hands. When that's explained by Islamic, scholars and experts, they say that the changing with your hand is speaking to authority. So anybody who's in a position of authority, those people need to speak out and they need to say something. Just like when we spoke about I almost even describe it as like tribalism between the police officers who, rather than speak to that other officer, they kind of just gave it a pass and just stood there, but they had authority. They could have said something to them. They were colleagues. They're coworkers. I know that we don't know if one was a sergeant versus somebody being lower than that, but they definitely have authority. They have a badge. They could have said something. And so anybody who may have authority, whether it's a politician, whether it's somebody who works at an organization or a company. I had a friend who I was speaking with the other day, about this, and he works and lives in Minneapolis, and he had mentioned that he had coworkers who were just really in a cavalier fashion, joking about the death of George Floyd, and kind of mocking about the phrase that was he was mentioning over and over again, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, and then when he called it out, they were like, oh, too soon. And this is still all going on, but the fact that he said something, right, even though he wasn't the boss there, and then actually the manager who does have some authority, he said something, told him, no, you can't be talking like this about this. So anyways, people who have authority or some kind of form position to actually do something, and that's what many of the demands are from different organizations who come together and put it in writing and have eloquently raised those to different the right people, change it with their hand. Okay, Thayyib, if those people who don't have authority per se, but just like we have this platform, what is it, StreamYard, Zoom, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, whatever it is, if you don't have some authority, then you should be saying something with your tongue, like what we're doing right now. Right? I'm not a politician, I'm not a police officer, but I am somebody who, works in the community, with and in particular with the Muslim community, but also with the wider community. Then as it behooves me as a person of faith, I have to say something. And then so, and anybody else who can, they should also, whether it's your colleagues or coworkers, reaching out to your family, fathers and mothers talking to their children. But people should be saying something. White people, colleagues who also might be having that same question, that they don't have bigotry or they don't have certain biases, but they want to feel like they want to do something, but they're not an authority. Same thing. They can stand up and say something. Speaking to your neighbors and what have you. And the third thing is, I said, and hating it in your heart. And something interesting to me that the Prophet, peace be upon him, mentions that that is the weakest of faith. And I feel that anybody, irrespective of Muslim or otherwise, whether they Christian or whatever faith that they might have, people should not be in a position and maintain and stay in a position where they see something and they can't either A, do something about it, or B, say something about it and then just stay there. That should never be, people position that they see something and they don't like it in their heart, but they can't say or do something about it. And that's described by the prophet saying that that's the weakest of faith. It's still a level of faith. We're not going to disregard you completely, but that's a weak level of faith for you to be in a situation where you see something and you don't say or do something about it. And then the other thing was, that again, I can't, specifically speak to, specific solutions. But one thing I will say, and this I really say for especially the Muslim community, because I know we've been talking about, bigotry and racism from, white police officers and whatnot, and that in the establishment and the systemic racism and institutionalized racism. But so another piece that I wanted to add is within specifically in the Muslim community that I'm, a part of. And as that, there's also been a level of apathy and kind of distancing of themselves when it comes to issues that aren't specifically related to Muslims. So if it's not about Palestine, if it's not about Pakistan, if it's not about Somalia, if it's not about Ethiopia, Iraq, and I can go on, if it's not about those things, if it's about Black Lives Matter, if it's about Eric Garner, there's this deafening silence that a lot of times that comes from the community, and a lot of people are pointing that out. And as somebody who is, I guess, for what it's worth, considered somewhat of a leader in the Muslim community, I feel like one of the things that the Muslim community needs to do is to reach out to the Black community and other minorities, not just immigrants, but then also to listen to them and hear the solutions that they think need to come about from this whole thing. That's something that I feel like is not done enough. Is just us being quiet, not quiet on the issue itself, but in terms of the solutions and hearing really what the Black community has to say about that, and then from there, like strongly supporting those solutions that they bring, and then also at the same time offering their input and their solutions, but really letting the Black community like take the lead when it comes to specifically this issue. Yeah, that's kind of like my take on that. And then I'll just repeat something also that I heard Killer Mike say, is really, I hope from all of this that people start to strategize, mobilize, and especially civically, like civic engagement, and really these leaders and politicians, and beating them up as he said it in the polls. That's also another thing that the Muslims have oftentimes haven't been as actively engaged as they could be when it comes to these other wider issues. They are more and more as of late, I'd say in the last decade or so, they have been civically getting engaged, but specifically on issues, again, like I said earlier, about related to Muslims. But it should be issues that are related to the wider community. Because again, and I'll just finish with this, again, a statement of the Prophet, peace be upon him. He said, and this is اللهم صل على محمد لا يبلغ حقيقة الإيمان حتى يحب للناس ما يحب لنفسه, that a person will not actualize their faith until they love for the people what they love for themselves. And I think that Muslims really need to take heed on that they really need to love for everybody and not just themselves. Justice, fairness, equality, economic opportunity, and that is especially included for for the Black community. Yeah.
Ronnie?
Yeah, I mean, that was beautifully said. I almost wish I didn't have to follow that, finish. But yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think those are like, mega things that, and I think Imran, you may have started off at some point talked about, addressing things and, looking at things when it hits home, when it gets closer to us. And I think there's oftentimes that is something that, happens like that. We see things and we may not, get, immediately involved or pay attention until it's something that lands at our doorstep. And then we look to, join things and, we could have had, more of a preventive uh, possible approach before. A lot of times, we're reactive instead of, being preventative. And so things when we could have had a chance to maybe speak out and do things and hopefully, curb these things. Some of those opportunities I think we sometimes, may have missed. And so I think that is like kind of important message and call to action that, we see things that, that we don't agree with to, speak out and try to do something about it. Obviously, we can't champion every cause, that'll be unrealistic to have people do that. And sometimes I think that that's the expectations for some people that sometimes discredit people that's out there because people expect them to champion every cause. It's like, oh, well, that person spoke on this. Well, where were you at when this happened? Like, I don't see that person now. And it's like, they can't be responsible for everything. And then that's why I think we have to, do a better job of assigning and identifying leaders, to various causes in the communities, whether that be, any four of us or wherever it may be, to understand that, there's a role that we, can play. And obviously, there's a lot of injustice in the world that we can't, cover all, but we can do what we can. I think Abdullah, you said it great. I think it was a Snoop Dogg reference, like, kind of like, what is this dude here? Doing out here, and he's like, he's doing what he can. I thought that, that was just spot on, and that's kind of what he asking people to do what you can. Um, and just, yeah, solutions. I think, there's a lot of things that we can look at. Some of the things you all were saying, I think, was so important. I was, looking at and trying to like write some of it down to make sure I kind of, also kind of speak on some of it too, because I thought it was really important. I think Imran, like you were saying, two wrongs don't make a right. Um, I think is, something that we very, have to be very cautious of. I talked to some of my friends about this when it's, kind of like it was happening as far as the reaction. And people were kind of being out, I think, outside of this officer's house is what I heard. I didn't, go about to confirm it myself. So, I'm just gonna
No, they
go
were.
based off of,
They were.
yeah,
Yeah.
so yeah, and so I talked to some friends and they're like, oh, well, they missed their opportunity, to get justice or whatever. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? It's like, they had them and now the cops are there. They, to get justice, they should have killed them. They did talk. I'm like, whoa, 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 like that's not something that, you know, I would condone. I don't, think is the right approach. That's not necessarily justice. Yeah, someone lost their life and just to trade it for another life, not necessarily justice. Yeah, I'm like, well, and I posed a question to this, friend. I'm like, well, what do you mean to kill? I'm like, you don't think those people, if they were to do that they would go to jail? And I'm like, now how many lives and families are ruined by that? I work with prisoners and, you know, I see these, guys out here, and, I read their case files. I talk to them individually. I talk to them in groups and I see, what they're going through and what their families are going through. There's many lives that can be ruined. And so we have to be, careful not to become what it is that we believe that we hate, right? Like that we don't want to see. And I think we run that risk, of doing that. Like, for example, like a shoehorn, right? We got these two like idea of opposing sides, and people are extreme this way. If it was political, people are saying they're extremely conservative or extremely liberal, and we always see those sides fighting where they dislike, each other, and they become this kind of group think, where they just, they're only staying within their niche, and so their views get more and more extreme. They get further and further out, and there's an idea as well that it's not so much where the bar is just linear and it goes straight out, but it's more so of a shoehorn, and so it's bending at the end. So the two extreme ends, the two sides that seem to hate and shout each other and always blaming each other, they start to curve like a shoehorn, and now they actually a lot closer and similar to each other than they are dissimilar. And so I think that's, one of the risks and that we have to pay attention to when we start going extreme and saying, we don't like this other side, they doing this, and let's start, doing this and that extreme. We run the risk of, becoming what we don't like ourselves. And I think that's what kind of Michelle Obama was trying to, communicate when, she had that whole statement about, when they go low, we go high. Because in order to keep perpetuating that is, just like you said, Imran, those two wrongs don't necessarily make a right. And what path do we begin to go down that we no longer, confine ourselves and we lose ourselves and we become those things that we hate. So that's something that, I would caution people, to be aware of and to think about, as well. Also we talked about, the destruction of the property and, those resources in those areas. Again, a pandemic is still in existence, right? Like we still have things that's been limited. We talking about essential services, essential workers, possible, limits on foods and things. So I think we, by destroying this property, now we've, increasingly limited our resources where, Targets and, Walgreens and other things is closing, like in Chicago, people hopping over the pharmacies. These are centers for people to get medications, and to get needs. And now what? Now we can't get that right now because, we had a few people, acting out and now limiting our resources. Now you're making the situation even dire. And so, to people to be, also aware of that destruction of property is not, likely the answer. There are people who, like you all talked about, protecting that life and that property. Like those are people's livelihoods. Those are certain families that are attached to that. Like you said, there's some of you all may, like you said, the people that are doing it, they may have family and themselves, or, was cashiers at this place. Now they can't go to work. We already got a lot of people out of work. Now they can't go to work because, these things are going on. So there's some unattended direct consequences that, we have to be, more aware of. I think, creating opportunities, is going to be like very important, I think, as a solution to things, so like, as kind of mentioned earlier, sometimes when laws have passed, we think that it now just ratified, situations and rectified it that was, problematic, and now it's all fixed. But, the things that were going on while these was in place is not, going away. Again, like I said, I talked to these prisoners and these guys being released after years in prison. Take for example, in California, right now we're looking at closing possibly 2 prisons because the prison population went from 189,000 to I think like 123,000. Like we've been trying to get people out in this state, realizing like this incarceration thing is kind of too much. We got to get people out. But, you do the math on those numbers, that's 40, 50, whatever, 1,000 people just got out. What are they gonna, do now? Like what, where's that training? Like you talked about, like where's the jobs? A lot of these times they would talk about getting these skills and resources, and then again, now nobody wants to hire me. I still got to check a box. I was a part of like a study, back in Chicago with like employers looking at that when they were trying to get rid of those boxes because people, would check that they've been arrested, not even convicted of anything, but the mere fact that they've been arrested, and those employers and things were like tossing those applications. And so, you just get stopped, pulled over, arrested, not even charged with anything, and now that's done. So I think there's a lot of laws and things that exist that we have to get rid of and pay attention to just even begin to level the playing field. I think we talked about like voting as well and getting out there and doing that. There's still places where people have felonies and things that they can never like vote again and participate. How do you want people to follow those laws if they feel like they can't participate in making them? Right? We know that people are more likely to go along with things that they feel they had a decision in making. So if you say like, hey, I can't even vote, you won't even allow me to vote, but you want me to follow these laws? I had no participation in this law. That logic, is flawed. And so some of those little things, I think we have to just begin to like chip away at and make sure we quickly address to even, lay the groundwork to even provide chances for opportunity. And again, I think there's going to have to be government, intervention, because it was government intervention, that changed things, that left us behind in the first place, in a lot of these kind of communities. And so it's going to have to do that. And people are going to have to get over this idea and the stigma. And I used to be flawed in that way, thinking the same way myself, and before I, got increased education and been looking at more of this stuff, lately, and research and trying to get answers to this, to these things. And I'm like, oh, well, that's not going to be fair. It's not going to come off like, oh, now you're just doing one sector of the population, and everybody else not going to do that. And what was supposed to be like a capitalist country, that's not going to fly. But, I think possibly with that education and letting people know, like, well, this was the situations that exist before, and this is how that happened for you to get in your position. So, where is, these populations that's left behind, where is theirs time now to get theirs, to sort of balance out this playing field. And the educational piece, it becomes a trick, because how do we get it? We all have like all these devices, laptops, phones, that all this information is readily available. But how do we, get people to really go after it? We don't control the canon of the majority elite power individuals, in their school. We don't decide what books and topics they cover. A lot of these areas are segregated like that. So even if we educated ourselves about, the things that happen, like the people that might be impoverished educate themselves about what led to their position, is no, way that the elite, who they're going to need, assistance from in the government, is going to have that same education, because we don't, control that system. So I think that becomes, a tricky thing. And how do we get that message, out there? I think it's something that's going to be, important. And like you all talked about, Killer Mike and them really being, you know, advocates about, trying to make, the dollar work in your communities and multiplying it. I think it's something too that, we have to look at. I had to look at this myself, as I began to, like, I'm even currently like reading things about like the wealth gap, right? And kind of, understanding what's going on with that. And then that they kind of, talked about some of the things and these failures of like, black banks in the past, that were like how the things that created them also were their doom. So they were created because of the segregation and, the mainstream banks not lending to them. So it was a need in the community. But then that same segregated need put them in a segregated economy where they had no chance of actually, sustaining and working, because, banks and other things mainly thrive because of their access to the assets and communities at large of the whole nation. But being by segregated, you can't take those dollars and multiply them in that way. And so, monies were escaping. Like, for example, if there's people that, don't look like you, or not even don't look like you, let's just say like live in your immediate area, if they're the shop owners, but they don't live in that area, they're not likely banking in that area. And when that was segregated, that mean they took those dollars from that community and then they dropped it off in their bank in a whole nother community. And then that's where that money got circulated at. And then it just flooded, it just left your community. You didn't get it. And that made me look at, without sharing all my finances type things, but, I got like several bank accounts, and I like looked at that and I was like, you know what, let me check the boards of like my banks or whatever, and I looked and there wasn't a black face on any of these boards or executive for multiple banks, not a single black face, and not to be, targeting, whites or anything like that, but all the faces were those white people. And I think I told Imran, I think I told you about this too. And there was like maybe like, 2 or 3 Indian people out of that whole group.
That's right.
Something that really like struck me like, wow, so even money.
We're losing your audio's coming in and out, so it might be your headset.
Yeah, it's somebody calling me. So I was trying to like, let me see, make sure.
So I'm gonna while we're waiting.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
You can hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's a little weird because I can't hear myself anymore on the speaker through my earset.
You're good, man. We can hear you. Can you hear us?
Are we good?
Yeah, can you hear us?
Yeah, we can hear
I
you.
can't hear you all anymore.
Yeah, so you gotta try to get the wired headset or just disconnect. But what I'll say is while he's
I
connecting,
can't
guys,
hear you all.
you need wired headset. Yeah. So I like the shoehorn example he gave, guys, because that's something I firmly believe is when you see the shoehorn starting to curve, and that's one thing that I've noticed for years is that both extreme sides, they mirror each other. And one of the things that they mirror themselves in is their intolerance for
I
the
lost
other side.
audio.
You still can't hear us?
I can't hear anything.
Yes, so he'll jump back in when he can. But one thing that I've noticed is like both extreme sides, they don't like rhetoric. They don't even like the rhetoric of the other side. They don't want to entertain the other side. They don't want to dialogue or discuss issues with the other side. So that's why I always advise some of the younger brothers and sisters who I know who are very fiery in their speech. I say, look, do not be what you accuse the others of being, right? Which is intolerant. So let's see if you can you hear us now, Ronnie? Can you hear us?
Hello.
Can you hear us? So guys, if you don't mind, Abdullah, can you just take over real quick?
I'm sorry. Can y'all hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear us?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm back now. My bad.
So
I don't know what happened.
What I was saying is the shoehorn or horseshoe example you gave is great because both extreme sides, they mirror themselves in their intolerance, right? Where they don't even tolerate the rhetoric, the dialogue of the other side. They don't want to entertain their arguments. They don't want to entertain those individuals. But one thing that I'll say is in conclusion, and I'm out, you guys can just jump in at any time, is I think every one of you have brought in something very important. And I have to start off with what Elias said, which is number one, the preservation of life. The preservation of life is not an important goal only for people of a particular faith. This is a goal that every human being should have, right? Where we preserve the life of our fellow man. Number two, you strive your whole life to make a better life for yourself and your family. And usually you do that by buying property, buying a house, buying cars, buying things. And then when those things get destroyed, you're literally your items that are most valuable are being destroyed, right? So we preserve people's wealth, their properties, their lives. And as Abdullah and you mentioned in terms of now education, the power of education. And it's really ironic because yesterday I gave a 5-minute talk for an organization here in the Midwest. And I was talking about a local organization that I work with, which gives interest-free loans to college students. And interest, is strongly condemned in the Abrahamic faiths, right? And sometimes in religion, as common folk, we'll see condemnations or sometimes God or the Creator uses strong speech for things, either positively or negatively, but we don't really try to understand the wisdom in it. We just see the end result, which is this is the ruling. I'm going to follow it or I'm not going to follow it. But now the great thing about interest is student debt in this country is the second highest debt behind home mortgages, right? And the crazy thing about debt is that it leads to a lot of negative things. It leads to broken homes. It leads to divorces. It leads to self-harm. It leads to suicide. It leads to depression. In millennials, you see that it leads to millennials not wanting to buy a home, not wanting to start a business, not wanting to start a family. So just understanding that education and making education accessible is extremely important, right? Because you mentioned yourself, and I've mentioned this to you, and I've mentioned this to Abdullah. When my mind started changing is when I got to university, right? We both went to the same school, and I studied literature. For whatever reason, it was something about studying the arts, studying literature, that really started transforming my mind and transforming the way that I looked at the world. So we have to preserve people's honor and their dignity. We have to give them educational access and figure out how to give them that access. But just like the four of us very easily jumped on this call, except Ronnie just had some technical difficulties. 10 years ago, this was probably possible, but it was not this easy, right? And we see that innovation always happens when something in society drives for it to happen. And right now, because of COVID-19, you see so many people, even the program, the software that we're using today, I swear, I wish I would have invested in them 2 months ago, because I was probably one of the first adopters of it. And I've seen so many people from different communities who have adopted it. I said, man, I could have invested in these guys and made some wealth. But the point is that, look, this has been made easy. There's so many free educational resources online now today. Abdullah and I have worked with an organization called Academy M, which offers millennial mentorship. There's so many organizations and programs that are free out there that want to better the life of the everyday individual. We just need to raise awareness on these things. And I really believe that, look, like I said, two wrongs don't make a right. We should not be using violence or intimidation from either side on the other side, right? If we are all the children of Adam and Eve, the way we would say it from a faith perspective, we're all from the same family, right? We're at the end of the day, we're cut from the same cloth. So we have to learn how to work with one another, dialogue with one another, and benefit each other. As Elias mentioned, you have not completed faith until you want for society, community, your brothers and sisters, until you want for them what you want for yourself. So if I want 1,000,000 and I want to live a comfortable life and have a couple cars and be comfortable, I should want the same thing for my brothers and sisters. So guys, I really thank you. You guys can jump in if you want, but Abdullah Oduro, entrepreneur, coach, trainer, public speaker. Elias, community leader. I believe he said he's a principal now, no longer an outreach coordinator. And Dr. Ronnie Doss, an old friend of mine and a psychologist, somebody who works in the prison systems. Guys, I really appreciate you jumping on the platform and giving people insight into your perspective and letting people hear things firsthand. So thank you guys, and I'll let you close it all out with a word if you like.
I would just want to say thanks, for having me on and, having this dialogue with you all. I'm really glad that I was able to make it today to this. So I think this is, very important. It's enriching to myself, and hopefully others take from this and either, learn from this or even, motivates them to be that call to action for themselves to also participate and be that voice and make that change. So, I appreciate all you brothers, for being a part of this and, and sharing in this experience.
Thank you, Ronnie. Go ahead, Elias.
Can y'all hear me?
Yep.
All right. Yeah. I just wanted to go back to the thing about the preservation of life and how important that is, and also in Islam about the preservation of wealth and property, and that the whole reason why wealth and property is at risk right now and being damaged and stuff is because the preservation of life is what was violated first. That was the first thing that was violated, which is more important in the sight of God than property and wealth. They're not the same. Buildings can be rebuilt, property can be money can be earned again and so on, but the lives of not just George Floyd, but all of the other people who were taken, those lives can't be replaced. And so it was the failing to preserve and protect life, and that being gone against, is what has sparked everything else after that. Again, it can't be, it's already been said that it's not condoned, but I want to finish with that. In spite of everything that's happening in all of the different places in New York and in Seattle and Washington D.C. and the protesting and how it's leading to some the damage of property and so on and so forth, that we want to make sure that the conversation stays squarely on. It is the violation of the sanctity of life that is causing all of this. It is that is the catalyst for all of this happening. And so that is where the effort and the attention needs to squarely remain. And so I hope that anybody who might be listening to this, that whichever capacity that they get involved in and help, and whether it's through the education, as you all mentioned, or the upliftment of different communities, mentoring, saying things on the different platforms and what have you, that they make sure to keep it squarely focused on the sanctity of life, and that is what the people are protesting about, and that not be lost sight of. And I think that yeah, that's really what I just want to to say. And just to reiterate, what Dr. Doss said about, being involved in making change, that everybody be an agent of change in their respective capacities, whatever that might be. That there's really no excuse, especially with all these different avenues that we have to be connected and to be informed about what's going on. That's another thing too, is there's so much. I was talking to my little brother, I think about maybe 10 minutes just before we jumped onto this call, and he was saying how things can be muddled, that there's so much information, but trying to find, to be well informed so that we have, guided actions when we're trying to participate and help and make this whole situation better rather than worse. Again, thank you, Imran and Abdullah Oduro and Dr. Doss for sharing this platform and being patient with my input. And I hope that George Floyd's family, that they get justice, and I hope that the community of Minneapolis, which I forgot to even mention, that in that very store where that whole issue took place, I used to be the khatib or give sermons. They had a small masjid in the basement of that building. I used to be the like assistant imam there for like 3 years, which is the storefront Cup Foods where our brother George Floyd his life was taken. And I asked God to give his family and that community justice, and that out of all of this, that something positive and lasting change comes, not just people being quote unquote woke for the time of this news cycle, and then after a few weeks everybody goes back to the status quo of whatever. But I really hope that this brings some meaningful change about, and that everybody takes the time to be a part of it. Yeah.
Thank you, Elias. Yeah. Really appreciate all the insight you brought. And Abdullah Oduro, you mentioned the importance of OGs, so we're going to finish off with the OG of our group.
No, mashallah. I think everything what was said was spot on. I mean, it was excellent. I have nothing more else to say. I think that was really it. What they both mentioned kind of ends it perfectly, mashallah.
So once again, guys, thank you for joining. Don't leave the room. I'm going to end the show and we can just finish up our talk. But WalaWay listeners, please, say a prayer. Thank the brothers that joined us today. They spent a couple hours here with us today, enlightening us and sharing from their time when they should be, they have families and other obligations. So brothers, I really appreciate it. And WalaWay, we'll see you guys soon.
So do you have just to kind of lighten it up at the very end? I know you're not a member of a gang or anything, but sometimes do you ever end it off, just doing one of these, or for the W, the WalaWay,
Abdullah Oduro does not represent the WalaWay or its. That's I have to give credit where credit is due. So Abdullah is actually the one that came up with the name the WalaWay. So
no, you have to mention that, man.
We might have to make that into our sign for our shirt, and we can put that sign on the shirt, brother. But
I want to do that one time. Just me and you, just do it for me one time. Just throw it up like
that. I'll do it in passing. But thank God I just did it and my camera froze, so you guys missed it, man. I swear I did it, man, but the camera froze. Let me just end this broadcast real quick. You guys stay over here.
All right.
Okay. That's all I said.